All right, Judges 10, let's call this one forsook. It's literally going to come out of the text. We're just going to say late in the chapter, once again, since this is the book of Judges, Israel is going to find a way after having been delivered to prosper again for a while and then forget or forsake God. It's literally going to say they forsook him again. So this time, instead of forsaking them for a time, this time he's just going to say, look, the gods that you serve in your prosperity, ask them to help you this time. But before we even get there, there's a period of relative peace. There are two judges named Tola and Jair. And the interesting thing about them is there's not a whole lot said about them. And it reminded me of a story that we talked about going back to Genesis even, of a man by the name of Enoch. And not a lot was said about Enoch either. But later on, we'll see in the New Testament that it said Enoch walked with God and he was simply no more, because he lived a life that was so pleasing to God that he didn't have to see death. And so in looking at the life of Enoch, we said it wasn't always the number of years or the amount of noise that's made about you or the great tales that are written about you, but it's the quality of what you do in the amount of time allotted. Because Enoch came around in a time when people were living close to 1,000 years old. And in the chapter that describes his life back in Genesis, we notice that he only lived to about 365 years of age. And so even though he lived a shorter life than the people of his era, and not as much is said about him as some of the more famous names of that era, he was one who found the distinction of not having to see death again because he led a life that pleased God. And so pointing back again to Judges chapter 10, we see Tola and Jair, two judges that don't necessarily have a whole lot written about them. But one of the things that is also not stated about them is that cycle of failure that we see throughout the judges is not something that's mentioned during their administration. And so there are times when the fact that not a whole lot of noise is made about you can be a good thing, because especially in the context of a book like Judges or a situation like Judges, where a lot of the noise that is coming about has to do with all of the damage control that has to be done because of all of the things that are going sideways during that period of time. Sometimes in those kinds of situations, it's best not to have a whole lot said about you. And that is, in some ways, some of the upside of what we may be able to fairly read into the administration of those two judges, Tola and Jair. However, it goes back to normal after those brief few verses devoted to them. It's going to say Israel did evil again. And in response, as we already mentioned, God is going to say, look, the gods you love in your times of joy, if they're really real, ask them to help you now in your time of despair. And so the chapter is going to have this interesting twist in the selection of judges this time, because chapter 10 is going to end in something of a cliffhanger with the question, who will go forward for us this time in battle? Now that God, by the end of the chapter, is going to accept them back again after, once again, we said part of the cycle in the Judges is God giving them enough despair that their ears are finally open to the things that he and the judges that he sent before to save them are trying to get them to understand. And so once again, God listens to them again, and once they are finally willing to listen to him, he's going to offer them up a deliverer, and the chapter is going to end with the question, who is it going to be this time? And the interesting thing is the God who they forsook this time is going to pick a judge who likewise is forsaken, a man by the name of Jephthah. But more on Jephthah later. But for now, as we often say, his best to you as you go forward in him. This time, remember back to Enoch and Tola and Jair. There are times when anonymity breeds a level of peace we can't get with popularity. So to the degree we are experiencing a certain degree of anonymity that feels kind of like we're missing out, realize that some of the things you may be missing along with the popularity is the drama. So my prayer for you is my prayer for me. If you're currently dissatisfied with your current state of things, wishing you had a little bit more attention and recognition for the things that you're doing, realize that may not always be a bad thing. A lot of famous people who wish they could be anonymous again. So as we say, God's best to you as you go forward with him. God willing, in the peace that can come with anonymity.